Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Harlow. I'm an epidemiologist and a postdoctoral scholar here at USC in the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences. And today I'm going to be presenting on some ongoing research that examines the additive interaction of e-cigarette use and mental health symptoms and risk of cigarette smoking initiation among young adults in the United States. I'll briefly acknowledge my funders, NIDA, NCI, and FDA. So young adults have largely been ignored in major tobacco control efforts like the Truth Initiative. And this is because historically, most adult smokers initiate cigarette smoking prior to the age of 18 during adolescence. However, what we're starting to see in national trend data is that the proportion of young adult smokers who are initiating cigarette smoking after the age of 18 during young adulthood has been steadily increasing over the last 2 decades, and in fact, more than doubled between 2002 and 2018. Young adult smoking was recently the subject of a New York Times fashion section article in which cigarettes were framed as coming back into style. And we actually saw cigarette sales increase for the first time in 20 years in 2020. Two simultaneous behavioral health trends have coincided with this shift towards young adult smoking initiation. First, I'm sure we're all aware that e-cigarettes or nicotine vaping gained massive popularity among young people. And simultaneously, mental health problems increased among youth and young adults. So for example, it's estimated that between 2009 and 2017, major depressive disorder increased by 63% among young adults. So both vaping and mental health are well known to be independent risk factors for smoking among young people. There's now a really robust body of literature demonstrating an association between vaping and subsequent cigarette smoking. And cigarettes are often used as a coping mechanism for young people to deal with depression and stress and anxiety. However, what's unknown is whether young people who both vape and have poor mental health have a greater risk of cigarette smoking than can be explained by the individual risks of e-cigarette use and mental health alone. So this is a concept that we call synergism or interaction. It's also called interdependence. And there's very little data on the potential interactive effects of mental health and vaping on risk of smoking in young adults. So in this study, we aimed to examine the additive interaction of vaping and mental health symptoms on incident cigarette smoking initiation among young adults in the United States between 2013 and 2019. We used 5 waves of data from the Population Assessment of Tobacco and Health, or PATH study. PATH is an annual nationally representative prospective cohort study that collects very rich data on tobacco use and behavioral health measures. Wave 1 were collected between 2013 and 2014, and Wave 5, the most recent wave, was collected between 2018 and 2019. The study was designed as a stacked interval analysis in order to examine the association between current e-cigarette use and mental health symptoms at 4 baseline waves and cigarette smoking initiation at 4 outcome waves. And we examined internalizing and externalizing mental health symptoms separately. Internalizing symptoms include depression, stress, sleep problems, and anxiety. And externalizing problems refer to more behavioral issues like restlessness, fighting, bullying, among others. The sample included 6,746 young adults, 18 to 24 years old, who had never smoked a cigarette at the baseline wave. And then for our analysis, we used Poisson regression to produce risk differences in 95% confidence intervals using a generalized estimating equation framework to account for multiple observations per person. We defined a single exposure reference group, which were those participants with the hypothesized lowest risk of smoking initiation, which were those who reported no current e-cigarette use and medium or low mental health symptoms. And our models adjusted for a number of confounders listed on the screen here. So I'm going to present the results for internalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use first. And so when we looked among participants who reported no current e-cigarette use and had medium or low internalizing symptoms, we found a baseline risk of smoking initiation of 16.2%. So this means that for every 100 young adults, we would expect 16 of them to go on to initiate smoking, even in the absence of e-cigarette use and high internalizing symptoms. When we looked at the excess risk due specifically to high internalizing mental health symptoms, we found that the excess risk due to high internalizing symptoms in the absence of e-cigarette use was equal to an additional 1.6 smoking initiators per 100. When we looked at the excess risk due to e-cigarette use, we found that this excess risk due to e-cigarette use in the absence of high internalizing symptoms was equal to 8 additional smoking initiators per 100 young adults. And then looking at the excess risk due to both high internalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use, we found that that combined effect, that the excess risk due to having both high internalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use was equal to 17.2 additional smoking initiators per 100 young adults. And so if there were no synergism or interaction going on here, then we would expect that that excess risk due to both high internalizing mental health symptoms and e-cigarette use would be equal to the sum of the individual risks for mental health and e-cigarette use alone. But as you can see, that excess risk due to the combined effect of mental health and e-cigarette use was greater than the sum. And you can look at the yellow and green boxes. That's what we would expect if there were no interaction. So we estimated that the excess risk due specifically to interaction of high internalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use was equal to 7.6 additional smoking initiators per 100. Moving on to externalizing mental health problems, compared to participants with no e-cigarette use and medium or low externalizing symptoms, we found that the excess risk due to both high externalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use was equal to an additional 18.5 smoking initiators per 100. And again, we found presence of interaction, where that excess risk due specifically due to the interaction of externalizing symptoms and e-cigarette use was equal to 11 additional smoking initiators per 100. And so to wrap up, we found evidence of synergism between vaping and mental health and the risk of smoking initiation, whereby both internalizing symptoms and externalizing symptoms appeared to interact with vaping to produce an increased risk or greater risk of smoking initiation than could be explained by those individual risks alone. And taken in a broader context, this general shift towards young adult smoking initiation really points to the need for interventions that specifically target young adults and move beyond these traditional high school programs. And these programs may choose to target young adults who have mental health problems and who vape, as well as incorporate vaping components and mental health components and discussion of how vaping and mental health may interact to produce increased risk. Thank you.
Great job, Alyssa. Really interesting and really clearly presented. I was wondering if you've thought about a potential three-way interaction between internalizing symptoms, externalizing, and e-cigarette use.
Yeah, that's a great question because internalizing and externalizing symptoms aren't going to be mutually exclusive here. And so I am interested in potentially looking at the combined effect. It definitely would complicate sort of the interpretation more, but I think that it's probably worth looking at potentially defining a group that for folks who have both high internalizing and high externalizing problems and compared to folks who have low of both. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.